Welcome to We Don't Color on the Dog. I'm Rick Outson, and we've got with us Ryan Wiggins. Ryan, thank you for doing this.
I'm so happy to be here.
What got, I, I was going back and looking at some old stories, and gosh, it was 2017. You came to see me that you had this pro bono
Pro
group
bono.
you were working for because this unbelievable statistic that for 2000 to 2015 the state of Florida had over 16,000 child marriages, weddings that took place. I didn't even realize at the time that a 16-year-old could get married if their parent gave them consent, and a
Yep.
judge could make it even younger than that.
Yep.
You were willing to try to take that on. And what got me, trying to reminisce and put the facts together is what seemed to be pretty simple, that 18 should be the age, didn't become simple, did it?
No, no, it was actually one of the toughest legislative fights of my career. It was absolutely nuts. I took it on, just backstory for your listeners. I had a woman that I was working with. Her name was Sherry Johnson, and Sherry was 54 years old when I was working with her. But we were working on a story from when she was a child. So she was 8 years old when she started getting raped in her church. And she didn't even know what sex was. Like, she didn't know anything about any of it. She was a part of a Pentecostal church in Tampa Bay, right outside the Tampa Bay area. And she was basically passed around church leadership. And when she was in fifth grade, she was at school and they noticed that she seemed to be growing a little bit. And they actually did a gynecological exam on her in the gym, which I mean, it's just unfathomable
Right.
for me. And they discovered that she was pregnant. So she's 10 years old. She's pregnant. She had never even had a period before. Like, she had no idea what was going on. They kicked her out of school because you couldn't be 10 years old and pregnant.
Well, in
And they
elementary
called her mom.
school, yeah, right.
Yeah,
Elementary
right.
school,
So
right.
they called her mom, and her mom got really upset, as a mother would, except her mom got upset with the wrong people. So her mom stood up in the church and testified that her daughter had been seducing church leadership and that she was going to marry off to the deacon or the bishop or whoever who had been raping her. Well, this was something that was very, very prevalent in Florida at the time, because you could be a pedophile and you could be raping someone. And if you married them, they could not testify against you. So you were putting these kids in positions where they were getting locked into relationships, into contracts that they could not get into. It was a door with a handle that opened, but nothing once you were inside to get out. And she ended up having to marry this guy. She never got in more than a fifth grade education. She did not have the ability to get a cell phone or an apartment or a car or anything. Like, she was captive. And by the time that she was 21 years old, she had like 9 kids, which is absolutely, that's pregnancy after pregnancy after pregnancy
Right,
after
right.
pregnancy. She was finally able to escape that marriage and got into another really bad abusive marriage, and wasn't able to get out of that one until she was in her 50s. She had gotten her GED by the time I was working with her, but it pointed out that we had this issue in the state. And what was really, really surprising, what really got my attention, was that Escambia County was one of the top counties in the country, not just the state, in the country, where this was happening, because all of the child marriage laws for the states surrounding us, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, all of them were higher than Florida's. And we were at the gateway to the Sunshine State. So we were the first stop. I mean, my aunt is a circuit judge in town, and I talked to her about this when this was happening. And she said, there are a lot of places where the court's hands are tied, that, if a parent comes in and a parent says, I want my child to be married, the child says, I'm good with this, and the other guy's good with it, then they could do this. And it was just absolutely astonishing. So obviously, when I took this on, I'm thinking, this is the easiest lift
Right.
I've ever had.
Right,
Any
right.
issue I have ever taken on, this is the easiest one. This is common sense. We don't want our children to be raped. We don't want our children to end up in these situations that are way, 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 way out of their range of being able to handle it or get out of it or whatever. And it ended up being one hell of a fight. And so I'm here to talk to you about that fight and what I'm seeing now, because child marriage is back in the news. Florida has it handled as much as we could handle it. We never did get it to 18. We got it to 17, with the stipulation that they could not marry anyone more than 2 years older than them, which was the way we placated the people who said, well, what about military, who wants to marry before they go off to war or whatever? But it's back in the news nationally right now because with the whole traditional wife thing and all of the stuff that we're seeing, we are seeing that this is, again, something they're wanting to do. If your child gets pregnant as a teenager, you want to be able to marry them off to whoever got them pregnant. Especially if you're, not believing in abortion or in a state where you can't get one. So it's a really, really interesting place, and it's abuse that's happening that is legalized right now. And so
Yeah, we did the story in 17, 18. Seemed like you were making the progress was happening. We got it through one of the chambers. And then there was pushback. And that was the part that surprised me so much. And it was coming from some of the churches, the ones that were
yes,
pushing back against it. Talk a little
yes.
bit about that.
Well, I mean, it goes back to kind of what I was just saying is that, they're big on pro-life, and I understand that. I don't agree with it, but I understand that. And they're big on sanctity of marriage and all of these things. They also very much believe that kids are kind of the property of their parents. And so you should be able to decide. And that is what really has to be decided at a national level. I think that there's no way my kids are my property. I
Mhm.
brought them into this world and I love them very much, but they are their own humans and their decisions are their decisions. And it's my job to shape those decisions and to help them make those decisions, but not to make decisions for them that they themselves would not make and cannot get out of. And what we learned with the legislature at that point in time, the Speaker of the House was Richard Corcoran, and he had a 16-year-old daughter. And this was why this became a real issue, is that his take was, if my 16-year-old daughter were to get pregnant right now, I would want to force her hand to marry the guy who got her pregnant. And I mean, we've seen over and over and over and over and over again how that doesn't work. And that ends up in abusive marriages, and that ends up in marriages that don't work out for either spouse or the children that were brought into that marriage. So it was really interesting, the pushback that we got and the reasons why. I mean, we had a speaker, or we had a who was against us because she had been married off when she was 16 years old and she was still married and thought it was the greatest thing ever. And it's just, you can't enter people into contracts they can't get out of. So yeah, it was crazy, the pushback that we got from churches. It was crazy, the pushback that we got from the GOP majority. It was really astounding. And I mean, what I learned, I mean, we had a great sponsor in the Senate, and we
Mhm.
actually had a great sponsor in the House too. It was Jeanette Nunez, who ended up becoming the lieutenant governor of Florida. We had great sponsors. We had terrible leadership. And so we had deals that were like, okay, it was the 11th hour, Rick. It was the night before sine die. The bill had not passed. All it needed to do was go to the House floor for a vote. It passed the Senate, it just needed to go to the House and be voted on. And I happened to be at a bar at 11 o'clock at night the night before. And one of the things that was always a trick of mine when I was over in Tallahassee was to definitely be in the bars at 11 o'clock at night, because by that point in time, people had been drinking, and people had been drinking for hours, and loose lips would give you all the information you needed to be successful, especially the night before the last night of session. That's the place to be. And so I was there and I ran across the speaker's legislative director. And we were talking, and this is also one of those great things about being named Ryan, is that people don't realize that I'm Ryan. They're always expecting a man.
Right.
So they knew that Ryan Wiggins was working on this issue, but they did not know that I was Ryan Wiggins. And I was talking to this legislative director, and he told me, I was asking about this issue. And I said, yeah, it's going to come before the House tomorrow. And he laughed. And he goes, no, it's not. He goes, that's what we've told your Senate sponsor, so that the Senate sponsor will pass the legislation that we need to pass out of the Senate, but we're not bringing it up. And I got pissed because we
Mhm.
had worked
Right.
so
Right.
hard to get to this point. So I went and got on my phone and called my lobbyist and called him out of bed at midnight and said, you have got to start making some calls because this bill is not going anywhere. And he goes, no, 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 it's going. I know it's going. I have assurance from the speaker. And I said, that's great. I just talked to his legislative director. This is not going. And it's not going because the Republicans have no stomach for this. They do not want to end this in the state. And so we ended up passing it. But like I said, we passed it at the 11th hour. Truly, the 11th hour. It was one of the last bills that passed that session. That session was terrible. That was the Parkland session.
Right.
So
Right.
there was a lot of emotion. There was a lot of tension. And there was a really good chance that Parkland situation could have killed my bill. We kept it alive because it was so important to protect kids. And it was so important to protect kids, surprisingly, from their church. It was important to protect them from their parents. It was important to protect them from leadership in the legislature, but also leadership in their communities, because that's who was violating them. That is who was hurting these kids. And so terrible fight. I woke up every morning of that session and rolled over and threw up, because it was like, I cannot believe I'm having to convince people that marrying off children is a problem. But we got it done. And we got it done with a lot with the help of our local delegation here too. And at the time, and at the time, Andy Marlette, who did some really, really nasty, wonderful cartoons about Richard Corcoran marrying a child. So it was an all team effort that shouldn't have been. This is common sense. It's common sense now. It's common sense across the country. We should not marry kids. Kids should be allowed to be children. They should be allowed. It's such a small time that they are allowed to be so innocent. We should allow that to happen.
Yeah, it did. It was stunning to me that, that Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia had stricter laws than we did.
Yes.
Which was, why we had over 16,000, over 1,000 a year for a 15-year period. And it just was, to me, was stunning. Because you joke about shotgun marriages in Mississippi and Alabama, but we were the place.
Shotgun marriage capital of the South.
Right.
And it's just unbelievable. I mean, in this day and age, the fact that that's even a thing, the fact that you would consider putting your child in a situation, well, in any time, right? Like your child's been raped and has been impregnated because of this rape. You are going to make them marry the person who raped them and put them in this position? Like, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And yeah, I mean, the fact that this was really happening in her case, it happened in the church. It was the bishop of her church. I mean, it's supposed to be a safe place, especially for kids. And
well, it's one of those fights that, like I remember you coming to see me and we started going through it, and this seemed like, okay, I'll do an article. Andy got excited about it. You've got most of the media in the state rallied around it. It was it seemed to be a simple fix. And it was just stunning to see the pushback against it. And, and some of that's what, to me, in today's world, what's bothersome about some of the talk about parents' rights.
Yes.
It kind of goes back to what you were saying a little bit earlier, that some interpretation of that is that their kids, they own their kids, and their kids have to do it that, it doesn't mean the parent's going to do stuff that's in the best interest of their child. No. And we see that quite a bit. So it's a bizarre world of hot button red meat issues. And this is, I think, an instance with what you were involved in here. I think it's a reminder that we've got to look beyond what seems on the surface kind of makes sense, but to realize there's some real harm that can happen.
There's some real harm that happens. I mean, and I mean, the fact that, it's 2025 and we're still having to explain to people that people are not property is just shocking. Like, these little people that you created, they're beautiful little people, but they're little people with their own thoughts and their own, I mean, my oldest son is so much further in the bleeding heart territory than I am. But he's his own little person, and I have to encourage him to figure out who he is and what he wants, not make him a clone of me, but to help him figure out who he is. And I think that parents sometimes forget that your children are yours to raise, but they're not your property. Not ever.
Right. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for doing this.
Of course.
I've digged through all those old articles, and it was just, when I went back to the facts, it was just shocking. It really, truly was.
Shocking. And I mean, the fact that, like I said, we're on this push nationally right now, back to the traditional wife role, back to subservience, back to children are meant to be seen and not heard. This Christian nationalist movement toward servitude and being subservient to the man in the house or the head of the church or whatever. It's dangerous. And it's not a victimless crime. The victims are very real.
For sure. Ryan, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rick.
Take care.
Thanks for watching, and to keep up with what's going on, be sure and subscribe. Just click on the little dog to the right and click the subscribe button. You can also like this video and click on the bell, which will notify you of new content. This really helps the channel grow. We appreciate you.